Jeff, we're going to bring Keith Pompey in a second as he joins us. He is just finishing up the press conference day after with Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers. Keith, how you doing, man? Thanks for taking the time.
And anytime, fellas, anytime.
When are you getting on the flight back down to Miami?
Scheduled.
Unfortunately, next year.
I turn on the day after press conference, and they, Maury and Doc say their thing, and who's the man asking the first questions? Our guest today, Keith Pompey, asking about the weaknesses the team had. So I'm going to take a step back. What happened, Keith? This team won games 3 and 4, looked great. Joel doesn't win the MVP, and then it's just done. What happened in game 5 and game 6?
Yeah, I don't think him not winning the MVP had anything to do with it. Like, I know some people said that was the narrative, but Joe and I talked about we talked when we were in Toronto one day after shoot around, and he was like, Keith, I'm not going to get it. I already know that. And I was like, yeah, he probably won't, this and that. So I think the fact that it became official did not impact him. I think what happened is kind of like, if you looked at it, role players, and I know this is a little overblown, but it's true. Role players tend to play well at home, and they do stuff. And I think that you got guys like George Niang who didn't show up. James Harden had one good game in this series, one good game. And I think after that one good game, he thought he was Houston Rocket James Harden in the next game, and it just went south. Danny Green kind of struggled that. And I also felt like when Danny Green went down, and there was a lot of people who disagreed with me, but I felt like with their lack of depth, when Danny Green went down in game 6, it was over, because you don't have anybody who can make a consistent 3. You had to rely heavily on Matisse Thybulle, who's a one-sided player. And I just felt like they had nothing after that. That's what I felt like.
Look, you were in the building. I was in the building. The building looked like it wanted to erupt, and it couldn't. And it would just, as a fan, it just seemed like they were lethargic. Like they came into that game literally from the jump with no energy. Yeah,
I mean, it was no energy, but I think they were a little probably worn down. I mean, when you think about this team, and I'm not saying anything that nobody doesn't know. I'm not trying to take a shot at this team or anything. But if you take Joel Embiid off of that team, even with James Harden, they're a play-in team. They're like battling for the 10th, 8th, the 9th. You know what I'm saying? They're like that squad. And I felt like that once we saw that. I mean, we saw that. They're just not that good, dude. And you look at the Miami Heat, and they have dogs on that team. They take Jimmy Butler's personality. Kyle Lowry killed them. As much as I love him, he killed them in the 2 games he played. And you look at that bench that they have, and you're saying, hold up, you're bringing Tyler Hero off the bench. You're bringing Victor Oladipo off the bench. Like whenever they mixed and did the match, and how, you start staggering a starting lineup. I mean, they had guys in there who were all starters at other places in that lineup. So, I just think that the Sixers didn't have it. They may have looked lethargic, I think, but they also knew, it's kind of like when you go in a fight with Mike Tyson, you kind of know that if this isn't going to end well, right? And I think that as Brett Brown used to say, pre-mortem, how are we going to die? They knew that they were going to die.
You asked Daryl Morey if James Harden is more a facilitator going forward. James seems to think that an offseason will help him. All I know is watching last night, he went 22 minutes in the second half and attempted just 1 shot. He had 2 shots in the whole game. His last made bucket was with 3 minutes at the 3-minute mark of the second quarter. And it was the only game in his whole career that he did not attempt any free throws. So what happened with James Harden? Because there were so many times where He looked lethargic on passes, lethargic on rebounding. Now, maybe you can tell me it was Miami having more hustle, but it looked like it took two to tango there, and Harden just wasn't chasing after when something went wrong or wasn't chasing after the rebound.
Yeah, he looked like a guy who was defeated. Like, I didn't like his body language. I didn't like his effort towards the end. Like, he just looked like a guy that knew that they were going to lose, and I'm not saying he quit, but he just didn't look like he gave the effort. You looked at guys like Tyrese Maxey, who was fighting all the way through, Shake Milton fighting all the way through, and James just looked like a guy that's like, we know is over, and I just didn't like seeing what I saw. Like you said, he didn't attempt a free throw. But the thing that really disturbed me more than that was, here's a guy that the 76ers has said is going to help lead them to the championship. He's a guy who they said is going to be the second star, going to be the closer. Well, he only had 2 shots in the second half and missed both of them. I mean, the first half, 4 for 7, 3 for 5 on threes, 11 points. You say, wow, that's a pretty good, solid first half. Well, in the second half, he was supposed to step up, and he didn't. It just seemed like, he became Ben Simmons. In the second half, it looked like.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the second half of this game. He had 34 points in the second half of the playoffs. He just, I'm not sure what's going on, but we'll get into what happens next. But the whole point of getting rid of Ben, other than he was a malcontent, is you wanted somebody who would contribute coming down the stretch, and we didn't seem to get that. And I'm not sure the optimism that Daryl Morey has, or the BS he was slinging at you about the flexibility they have with the cap and all this other stuff, but I don't know how they fix it. What do they do for that?
Yeah, that's tough. I got to look at the cap thing. I think now they do have a lot of guys like the Shake Miltons, the B-ball Pauls of the world, guys like that, Charles Bassies. I even think Isaiah Joe, I'm not 100% sure, but I think they come off the books. Danny Green will probably come off the books with that injury, right? So, I hate to say it, a great guy, but this is a dog world, right? Maybe you might keep him and try to trade him, but at the same time, I think they have a little flexibility, but the problem is, like, are you going to be able, are you going to be able to go out there and get a guy who can contribute? And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of times in the NBA, like, yeah, they say, oh, yeah, you saying you could win a ring? I could win a ring. Okay, that's great. But how much money are you going to pay me? This other team is saying they're going to pay me $5 million more. You know what I mean? So, yes, you may be able to get players, but is it still going to be the same thing? Like, you went out there and you got Andre Drummond because on a minimum, because he was really good friends with Doc Rivers. You got George Niang on what you got him with because there was no other teams. What happens when it becomes a bidding war and there's another team and they say, hey, come here, we'll pay you and we'll have a legit team. And that's the thing. So it all sounds good like afterwards, because let's face it, you turn on radio, talk radio, like you listening from here now, and everyone's talking about the doom and gloom. You look on TV, it's the doom and gloom. So of course, the press conference is going to be, you know what? We got a lot of flexibility. We could go out there and we can get people. But, outside of, like when we look at the people that they brought in the last couple of years, I mean, yes, they got James Harden, but it's not the same James Harden. They got George Hill. Not that wasn't too good. Then there was another guy who I forget his name right now that they picked up in the buyout market. So there's nothing out there that's really showing us that they're going to be able to go out there in free agency and bring in somebody solid. Now, George Niang was a big pickup. He struggled in the postseason, but there's nothing out there that's telling me that the Sixers are going to be able to outbid someone or even lure someone in here in free agency that's going to make an impact right now.
Well, that's one of the other problems is it's not even just the outbidding. It's, this has become a recruitment process, players recruiting other players.
Mm-hmm.
James Harden doesn't exactly have a long history of getting along with his teammates. I mean, when he was at Houston, he wanted Chris Paul out. When he was at Houston, he wanted Russell Westbrook there, and then that issue happened. And then he gets then he sulks his way out of Houston, gets to New Jersey, or not New Jersey. Yeah, it makes me old. Brooklyn, and has an issue there. And he gets here, and he doesn't seem like he's exactly bonded with his teammates either. I mean, yesterday, I don't know what the issue was, but there was a point at which Maxey threw something down on the ground after talking to Harden. So are people going to want to play with Harden?
I don't think it's all about Harden right about now. I think it's all about Embiid. You know what I mean? Like right now, it's kind of like, Harden is a tough sell. But when you look at how they're playing, and you saw Maxey threw something down, and that could have been frustration, like, dude, get your head into the game, right? But I think right now, Harden is like in the Houston situation, he was the focal point. There's nothing that he did yesterday or he did in his playoff series that was going to tell me that, I'm coming here and I got to really be with Harden. Now, again, he does have the ball in his hands, but I think it's all about Embiid and Maxey. Do you want to play with them more so than Harden right about now? I mean, because, has he shown you anything for somebody to say, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it's one of those things where you go, it's like you go on the court, and it used to be this guy on the court that used to be the man. And then there's a young dudes, and back in the day, everybody used to dap him up. Then all of a sudden, they just walking past him and going to someone else. Like, I don't think that he still has that cachet on this team.
It's now been 10 years since Doc Rivers made it out of the second round. In that time, he's coached Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and James Harden. Not for lack of star power. He thinks he did a terrific job, according to his press conference last night, and we can write the headlines as we'd like. Today, he got a seal of approval, it sounded like, from Daryl Morey. I enjoyed your follow-up where he asked if you were strenuously objecting to see why he thought he was such a great coach. Can you explain to me and our listeners why Daryl Morey and everybody is so infatuated with Doc Rivers, if they actually are? Because I don't see it.
Here's the thing. I don't even know, if sometimes you have these press conferences right now and people say things and it sounds great and we all write it because, hey, he said it, right? But that doesn't mean anything can change. For instance, let's say if the Lakers say, hey, look, can we interview Doc Rivers? And the Sixers look at that and they say to themselves, hey, you know what? We got 3 years, $24 million. We can get this out of here, and we can bring in D'Antoni, right? Mike D'Antoni. So what he says today is kind of like, and here's the thing, and it's nothing against Daryl Morey, but you remember there was a time when Daryl Morey came out on the record and said, we're not trying to trade Ben Simmons.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, he tried to trade Ben Simmons. So yes, he said what he said today, but that doesn't mean that he has 100% confidence. He wants you to think that he has 100% confidence.
Look,
does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Oh, believe me, I worked in and around politics for 20 years. I'm very good at people saying something without saying anything and not answering any questions and then going back on it and hoping not to be called out on it. So I understand that. To me, it would just seem the best thing for the Sixers if the Lakers want him to get out of the contract and do something new. But what I don't understand, what I've asked Jeff is, how does Joel Embiid fit in a Mike D'Antoni offense when he barely gets under the net in this kind of offense? Is that the coach? I know Harden seems to like him according to reports, but is that the guy that can do what they need to do?
You know what? It's kind of, here's the thing about Doc. I know a lot of people don't like Doc, but I can't blame anything on Doc, because I'm just going to tell you this. When they played Miami, and we talked about it beforehand, when they played Miami and you see the two dudes coming off the bench or three or what have you, like Duncan Robinson only played one game. Duncan Robinson would have been the starting small forward for the Sixers, right? He would have been the starting small forward for the Sixers. So he only
And their
played one
defense
game. So
still
I'm
would have
looking,
stunk.
huh?
And their defense still would have
They
stunk.
still, yeah, but he would have
Right.
had a bunch of threes. But see, the thing is, like, Doc Rivers went into a gunfight with a butter knife. Now, one of those butter knives you got from Chick-fil-A, like the plastic ones that crack, like when you try to cut the chicken and the chicken might be too hard and it cracks. That's what he had. And then you look at James Harden, like James Harden was supposed to be the difference, and he wasn't. So I get what you're saying about Doc, but this team, I don't think Red Auerbach could have got them to the Eastern Conference Finals. I just don't. I don't. I mean, if you want to be real, like I don't see it. You know what I mean? And it sure as heck wouldn't have been a Michigan coach getting them there.
Jeff,
Wait a second. Do
You
you
were
not
saying-
think Juwan Howard would be a better coach for this team?
Look, man, I
I don't want him
Luke
leaving.
Rockne. I don't think a reincarnation of Newt Rockne and the Red Auerbach, the greatest coach of the Yankees, and what's the coach of Ohio State football? What was the dude? The old name, the legend. What's his name?
Who? Urban Meyer?
No. Back in the day, guy who like got fired for like messing with the guy's face.
Oh,
mask.
Woody Hayes.
Yeah, Woody Hayes. I don't think a blend of all three of those guys would have gotten this team out of the second round.
And I understand that. Look, I didn't have expectations for a second round. Sorry, I cut Jeff off again. Jeff wants to talk. Go ahead, Jeff. I'll stop asking questions here.
Hey, Jeff, could Bo Schembechler get him out of the second round?
Not now.
I didn't see them make any adjustments. Jimmy Butler was killing him. When did they go to double him? Like they always left one man on him. It was clear no one man was going to cover him. Danny Green was never going to stay with Jimmy Butler. Mark Thibault, as good as he is, was not going to stay with him. It didn't seem like there were adjustments in rotations to what they were doing. It seemed like there were guys open all the time. I get you don't have resources, but when they switched to a zone defense in some of those games against the Heat, they slowed them down. Why didn't they do that more? Why did they go one-on-one? It just seems like I get you can't excuse the coach, but I just think that to not give him some responsibility for not using what he did have, which may have been a plastic knife from Chick-fil-A, but try and find a fork to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I get you. I mean, the coach, you do give the coach some blame, but I think in this instance, I think the roster was just so bad, and also I feel like that, I feel like James Harden wasn't a good fit. I feel like when they made that trade, I mean, the trade and they lost the backup center, they lost their best shooter. I feel like that put them back. I mean, we got to realize something. Before James Harden played in the game, they were in first place in the East. Like they elevated first place. Now again, if they would have beat the Detroit Pistons, they would have finished the season second in the East, right? So I understand all that. So when we talk about all that, to me, it's just it's just a lot, man. It's just a lot going on, and I feel like it's bigger than the coach. He's easy to blame. He is, but I feel like, and he is going to be the fall guy if there is a fall guy, because they're not going to blame James Harden. They're not going to blame the roster. It's going to come down to him. But I think that is not fair for us to do that when you know all the stuff that they had to go through. Like
but you didn't even mention the guy that really should take the blame if this all goes south. And the guy that should take the blame is Daryl Morey, because what happened as a result of bringing James Harden here wasn't only that you got a James Harden who's a shell of himself. You got James Harden and you gave up all of your depth to do it. How much? I'm not telling you that this team would have won a championship, but how much better would this or deeper would this team have been if they had gotten CJ McCollum for Ben Simmons and still had Curry and still had Drummond as a backup at center?
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And it's funny because I was talking to certain people today and I said, you guys would have been better off with that. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And then, not saying you guys said the Sixers would have been. And the people were looking at me like I was crazy. And then once I said, what I mean by that is, you would have kept these people. And they were like, whoa. the Sixers would have kept him. They were like, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I get it. I get it. You know, so that was crazy. That was, a bad situation, and that the trade just didn't work out. I mean, you go to a thing and you're fired up about, getting who you got, and it just seems like you lost too much.
All right. Well, Keith, I'm going to ask you to go in the Wayback Machine and just make a judgment here based on all your basketball knowledge. What about 10 years ago, the Sixers traded away Drew Holiday for what ended up being Nerlens Noel? Would the Sixers be any worse if you had to look back in your crystal ball if they had kept Drew Holiday and built around somebody like him and not have gone through this whole process?
On that,
No, they wouldn't have been. They wouldn't have been any worse. I think they might have been better. I do. I think the process really messed everything up. I'm not a fan.
that team had Lou Williams, Nick Vucevic, like that had some young guys who are players. Andre Iguodala, guys that have won titles with other teams. Like I know that we all went through the process, but I still don't understand. That team had beaten the Bulls. I know that there was an injury in the first round. They lost in the second round, but they didn't do any worse than any of these teams in the process era of it. So now you've got a team that you go into an offseason that still hasn't won a title since or made the conference finals and since Allen Iverson and before that Dr. J.
And based on that, that's going to be a cliffhanger, and we're going to have a whole off season that we get to talk to Keith about that. But that man's got to go right now.
Go right,
so
Keith.
He'll have all sorts of stuff to talk about with us as the off season goes on. But go get him.
Go do it, Keith.
All right, y'all. Peace. Thank you.
For your stuff. Thank you, man.
Go Ohio State.
Oh, really? Then now you got to.
He cut off. Okay, so that was beautiful.
That
so for
was
our listeners
wrong.
who don't know how that happened, so Keith let Jeff know that he had to go write his story. Did the Go Ohio State and then cut off before Jeff could get any response in on that.
You believe that? I got him off the air so he could go break something, and he ends it with Go Ohio.
Do I apologize on the air for stealing all the questions?
No.
Okay.
I don't want to talk to him anymore.